1917 East African time. I know I've started a bit late today, but it's of course because of the heavy rains. It's raining really, really heavily in Nairobi to a point that coming to the studio is a problem. But I'm here. It is the 16th of May 2024, and I'm here to look at each and everything that was happening throughout the whole of Africa, all the way from Niger, Benin, Tunisia. We're going to be looking at Kenya, Nigeria. We're going to be looking at Museveni and why Museveni is in Kenya. We're going to be looking at the AUC job, the African Union chairmanship job that is on people are vying for, and a Kenyan was supposed to vie for it, and it looks like he's not vying anymore. So what happened, and why did Raila Odinga allegedly step down from the AUC job, the African Union chairmanship job? But on our main focus, we're going to be looking at the Niger. Benin and Niger have been having a border row. I told you about this on Tuesday. They've been having a disagreement, a border disagreement, where apparently Niger, I told you about this. Niger is a landlocked country, and it signed a deal with China that would see it export $400 million worth of oil to China. But as I said, Niger is a landlocked country, so it doesn't have an outlet. It has no way of loading the oil onto Chinese vessels. So it did need Niger. It did need Benin in order to transport its oil. And so the story goes, Niger had closed its side of the border, the side of the border that borders with Benin. And Benin was not taking it, it was not having it. So it said, if you're not opening the border on our side, then there is no way you're gonna load your oil on our ports. And so the disagreement has been going on with people like kids saying they do not trust Benin at all and Benin should not open the borders at all. People like me saying I also don't trust Benin at all, but Niger needs Benin, so Niger should cautiously be very cautious about it, should cautiously open the borders in order for it to be allowed to load their vessels on the Benin port. So I was of the opinion that Niger should open the borders but cautiously do so in order for it to be allowed to load the oil on the vessels, because at the end of the day, Niger needs Benin more than Benin needs Niger. It looks like they had a temporary agreement because Benin has now allowed Niger to export its oil from their port temporarily, though. So it was on May 15th today, yesterday, when President Patrice Talon met with the Director General of CNPC. So CNPC is the Chinese company that is handling the Benin-Niger export pipeline. So following the meeting, Benin's energy minister announced that Benin has granted temporary and provisional authorization of the first ship to load Nigerian oil at the same port. This decision comes after a request from Nigerian customs to participate in the loading operations. However, the authorization does not mark the the start of the normal exploitation activities. The minister emphasized that regular pipeline operations require a proper state-to-state relationship framework and mentioned the importance of reopening the Nigerian border. So the first ship is expected to be loaded within 36 hours. So they just granted them 36. They just granted them permission to load the first ship, but he emphasized that that was not the start of normal exploitation. There has to be a proper state-to-state relationship. So this is Benin simping for Niger. It's literally asking Niger to consider it. In the president's word, he said that you have to stop treating us like enemies if you want to use our ports. So at least they had a temporary agreement, and for that, the first ship will depart within 36 hours. I told you Niger produces about 20,000 barrels of oil per day only for domestic use. However, Niger is so oil rich that it has the capacity of producing 90,000 more barrels comfortably, more than 90,000 more barrels comfortably, but it doesn't produce that because it has nowhere to take the oil. It has no outlet. Being landlocked is a disadvantage, a very big disadvantage, because you have to have good relationship with other countries, and that is why Uganda's Museveni is in Kenya, but I'll be telling you about that later. So they signed a deal with China a Chinese company called CNPC that would see 90,000 extra barrels exported, and that was why they were having that standoff. So even President Patrice Talon never met with the Nigerians; he met with the Chinese. It looks like the Chinese oiled his hands and he allowed them to export the first ship. So he did not do this for the Nigerians. He did it because the Chinese met him. So we're gonna see what is going to happen. But as I said, Niger really does need Benin. Otherwise, they're just gonna have a lot of oil that they can't export. The other outlet is the Moroccan route, which I doubt is a prospect because for the Chinese and the Benin government to have really worked on this, and the Nigerian government to have really worked on the Benin route, constructed the 20,000 kilometer pipe, they must have ruled out Morocco as an alternative route. So they just have Benin and they have to find a way to work with Benin cautiously. The word is cautiously. Because as Kid was saying on Tuesday, you can't operate you can't operate uh, like an island. You can't operate alone. Whereas an African country, you have to interact, you have to trade, you have to do business with other countries. All you have to do is, the word is cautiously. You have to be on the lookout. You have to know they are not. You have to treat them like an enemy, but trade with them. The 48 laws of power, law number 2, that says keep your enemies close. I don't know if it's law number 2. I don't want to mislead you. So it is up to Niger now to find a way to work with Benin in order to be able to earn the 400 million that they need, $400 million that they need in order to pay their debts and in order to escape the debt trap, which they are also in as is many other African countries. So that is what was happening in Benin Niger conflict today. Finally, it looks like there might be a solution in the offing after the Chinese intervened. In Mozambique, as ISO Maria is talking about, there are reports that an Islamist group used child soldiers in Mozambique attacks. Child soldiers have been used in Africa for the longest. If you look at DRC, child soldiers are the ones that are being used in DRC. The worst one was in CAR, in Central African Republic, where I saw somebody saying how they get murdered because you can't. The soldiers get murdered because they get attacked by 13-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds, and as a soldier you can't bring yourself to shoot a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 13-year-old, and in exchange they shoot the hell out of you and you're dead. So I saw that story in Central African Republic where soldiers were getting attacked by 13-year-old young boys, and because of that humanity in them, they could not bring themselves to shoot them at first, but they ended up killing so many of them to a point that they are now killing them back because you have to stop treating them as children. It's kill or get killed. But when we have young kids who should really be in school, the ones that we expect to liberate Africa, being used already as young as 13 to fight sponsored chaos, to fight propaganda instigated wars that they do not even understand what they are about. For example, the ones in Mozambique, they are fighting in an Islamist group. It's in a province in Mozambique called Cabo Delgado. So for 13-year-olds to have been brainwashed into the religious narrative so hard that they are now killing people because apparently I'm Muslim and you're not. And it's so easy with the sponsored chaos because all you need to do in Africa in order to sponsor chaos, in order to start an uprising, you just need to spark the religious fire. You just need to tell the Christians that the Muslims are plotting to kill them, and tell the Muslims that the Christians have been told that you're plotting to kill them and they are coming to kill you. And now the people will rise against each other, and as it is in Central African Republic, you left with diamonds and minerals and everything else. blood diamonds is the word to use. So in Mozambique, young boys as young as 13 were seen in attacks last week. And residents were saying they were forced to flee the fighting because they recognized some of the child soldiers as their missing relatives. So your missing cousin is the one, your 13-year-old missing cousin pulling up on you with an AK-47 and killing you is what is happening in Mozambique. So they went missing for some time. They were brainwashed into the religious narrative because most of these wars take the religious path. It's mostly it's the main path that they take. It's mostly the religious path or the tribal path. Those are the two paths that most wars, most uprising, most chaos in Africa take. The one in DRC has taken the tribal path, where people from this ethnic group are fighting against people from that ethnic group, and people from that other ethnic group that is not African are stealing the minerals. So it's how they operate. So in Mozambique, in Central African Republic, in Nigeria, in Somalia, in Ethiopia they are taking the tribal route. In Nigeria, in Central African Republic, in Somalia, they are taking the religious route, where all you need to do is spread religious propaganda, have what is called teach them the religion that does not even exist. You know, the hard teachings, especially from the Quran and the Bible, telling them about how those people are kafirs, they don't believe in Allah, so you should kill them. Those people do not believe in Jesus, so you should kill them. And it is childish, to say the least. It is not something we should be talking about in 2024. So witnesses were saying that dozens of child soldiers were used in the attacks, and they were seen carrying AK-47 assault rifles and ammunition belts. Two people from a family who were injured, by the way, said they recognized their 13-year-old nephew among the children. It's not even funny that your 13-year-old nephew who went missing a few weeks ago is coming back to kill you. So one of them, Abu Rachide, was talking to the media and he was saying how he saw him with his own eyes. He saw his 13-year-old nephew pulling up with an AK-47. And he's saying he kept wondering how he became a fighter like that in just 4 months, because he had been lost for 4 months and he came back a fighter. So there have been attacks in Mozambique over the past couple of days. The latest one being on Friday, that continued until Saturday, where Islamic fighters looted shops and warehouses for food and exchanged fires with Mozambique and South African soldiers before retreating. At least 10 people, mostly soldiers and other civilians, were reportedly killed in the fighting, with about 700 residents fleeing to the nearby forest to escape the attack. So the recruitment of children into the battlefield has been something that has been on the rise in Africa. I don't know. It is the aspect of finishing the generation and the next generation also, not just focused on the current generation. You finish even the next one, because when you start fighting at 13, what is your life expectancy? What is your possibility of getting to 18? When you start killing by 13, you're gonna be killed by 16 in these wars, because in countries like Mozambique, the groups are so many that, it's always wars and wars and wars. And it is a warring trend also, if you look at it, because right now I can name at least 15 African countries that are having wars as we speak right now, that I'm sure there's gunfire as we speak. The likes of Mozambique, the likes of Nigeria, the likes of Ethiopia, the likes of DRC, the like of Burundi, the likes of Central African Republic. I am sure as we speak, there is gunfire being exchanged. So the sponsored wars, the sponsored chaos in Africa are becoming a little bit too much. When we speak of the likes of Somalia, when we speak about the likes of Sudan, both Sudan, the southern and the Sudan, when we speak about the likes of, there are so many wars happening right now that You can't even understand what some of the wars are about. I was telling you in in Congo, there are so many groups that others don't have names. They don't even have an agenda. They just one group will be called the Congo Liberation Army, then the other one will be called the Anti-Congo Liberation Army. So that's how sad and the situation is in most African countries. So South Africa has deployed soldiers to Cabo Delgado, that is the Mozambique side, where there has been, I told you, there has been ongoing violence and wars since Friday, where I think it was in 2020 when Islamist fighters beheaded dozens of people, many of them children, and posted that online. So they went into inactivity for some time, but they are back now, and they have launched a new wave of attacks in Mozambique once again after going silent for some time. Yeah, so it's very sad when we talk about these wars in Africa and everything. But anyway, that was what was happening in Mozambique, and Mozambique is not the only country that is having uh, children soldiers. We have so many other countries that are having children fighting in wars. As I mentioned, the best example perhaps being Nigeria and Central African Republic. Anyway, let us look at another other parts of Africa. Where in Tunisia, I told you what is happening in Tunisia. Tunisia's president has refused to leave power. His name is Kais Saied. Kais Saied, Tunisia is supposed to have an election, and the electoral commission has said elections are we're gonna hold elections. But when asked when they're gonna hold elections, they're not answering that question. And people have had enough of Kais Saied, and they are in the streets protesting against his leadership. They want him gone. They want Kais Saied gone. Most of the people who have been leading in this are journalists and lawyers. And so there has been a crackdown. I shared a video yesterday of a journalist who was arrested, of a lawyer who was arrested on live television. He was being interviewed on live TV, and police pulled up and arrested him. So Kais Said is not joking with anybody who's against his administration. So his government, the Tunisian government, has launched a crackdown on perceived, they're saying perceived opponents. The journalists are being called perceived opponents. And they have detained so many activists, including a France 24 cameraman, journalists, lawyers. Some have been released without charges, but others are still in detention. Kai Said is saying most of them are traitors. He used the word traitors. He said he cannot tolerate traitors and had them arrested. So criticism of the president in Tunisia has been equal to undermining state security. So those ones who were arrested on charges of undermining state security. So criticizing a president in Tunisia equals undermining state security. And some of these things make me appreciate being a Kenyan, which in as much as we are not the best example to use, at least here I can sit here for the next 2 hours and throw shades at Root when nothing is going to happen to me. People do that every day. He really does not care like that. He's not gonna come for you because you criticized him. But you look at other countries like Uganda, like Maria is going to tell you. You look at other countries like Tunisia. You saw they are arresting people even on live broadcasts. You look at uh, other countries like Rwanda. There are countries where you cannot. Many countries in Africa where you cannot speak against the president. That equals to undermining state security. So people have been on the streets, reporters, uh, lawyers, and people calling for an end to the government's authoritarian tactics. But Said is saying he's gonna deal with all the traitors. So if you're a traitor, he's gonna deal with you. And a traitor equals somebody who's criticizing him. You criticize Kais Said, you're a traitor, he's coming for you. That is Tunisia. So there was actually one journalist who was sentenced to 6 months in prison for insulting him. So you should, if you are in Tunisia, you talk ill about the president, they are coming for you they're not waiting for the show to end, they're coming for you at that moment. So of course the US had to speak, it had to throw in some words, and the State Department spokesperson of the United States said that he was engaging Tunisia about the arrests, particularly those of attorneys and journalists. So they said they're gonna speak to Said, and so the arrests that were made, uh, so they made this cybercrime law in Tunisian government that is supposed to keep anybody from criticizing the government. So they made a controversial cybercrime law. They call it Decree 54. So Decree 54 is the one that talks about how how talking criticizing the president is undermining state security. So it's actually in the constitution. They added a cybercrime law decree that they call it the Decree 54. It was introduced in 2022 and Said took power in 2018. So it is against the constitution for anybody to criticize the president in Tunisia, because they're gonna come for you and you're gonna go to jail. So the people who are arrested are at a risk of going to 5 years behind bars if found guilty in court next week for criticizing the president, for asking when the election is going to be held. And Said is in his first term in office, by the way. I've never seen a president so stubborn in his first term. They're always stubborn in their second, third, fourth term. This one is being stubborn in his first term. He took power in 2018. And I told you, once he took power, the first thing that he did was make reforms. And he scrapped the legislature and he took power of the judiciary. So he is the head of the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. He's the judge, he's the lawmaker, and he's the president. Shout out to Said. Now he's also the head of the electoral commission, and he's not saying when the elections are going to be held. If you ask that, you're going to jail. In Kenya and Uganda have agreed to expand the Eldoret Kampala pipeline. This is in because I told you President Yoweri Museveni is in Kenya for a 3-day state visit. So they have signed a tripartite agreement following Uganda State Oil Farm to import the petroleum products through Kenya. So Uganda is also like Niger. It wants to export petroleum products, but it is landlocked. So Museveni had to come to Kenya to speak with President Ruto to have a pipeline built from Uganda to Eldoret through to Mombasa, where Uganda is going to start exporting state-owned oil, but it has to do that through Kenya. So Ruto was the one who made the announcement today after meeting the Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni in State House Nairobi. He said that the two nations had agreed during the second session of the joint ministerial meeting held earlier this week in Kampala, where 7 instruments of cooperation were signed. So he said, and I quote, the tripartite agreement on the importation and transit of refined petroleum products through Kenya to Uganda, whose signing we have just witnessed, enables the Uganda National Oil Company Limited to import refined petroleum commodities directly from producer jurisdiction, thus bringing an end to challenges faced by the sector in Uganda. So he's going to allow Uganda to export as well as import oil through Kenya, because Uganda is also landlocked and does not have an inlet nor an outlet. Uganda had strained relationships with Kenya, with Museveni preferring to work with the Tanzanian government. He had signed something with the Tanzanian president, but he looks like he has backstepped and he's now back to the Kenyan side. So they signed the MOU. The MOU is the Memorandum of Understanding, the Memorandum of the MOAs and the MOUs in education, cooperation, sports, and a lot of other propaganda that I don't want to go into. So they also jointly agreed to extend the standard gauge railway from Naivasha to Kampala to DRC. So the Chinese SGR is now going to be extended from Naivasha to Kampala to DRC. So going from Kenya to Uganda will now be through the SGR, of course, Chinese financed. So this comes after months after I told you there was a dispute between the two countries over oil exportation. Uganda had actually terminated any oil transit through Kenya and opted to work with the Tanzanian president. However, I don't know what changed and why. At one point, if I can remember well, Uganda sued Kenya at the East African Court of Justice. It was in December last year. It accused Kenya of denying the Ugandan National Oil Corporation rights to operate an oil marketing company in Kenya. It's what is called the OMC. So they went and sued Kenya in the East African Court of Justice. They stopped working with Kenya and went to work with Tanzania. But I don't know what has happened. They've now backstepped and want to work with Kenya, and that is why Museveni was in Kenya today to sign the oil deal that will see Uganda export and import oil through the Kenyan port. So as I told you, Museveni is on a 3-day state visit to Kenya. He's gonna be here from today to over the weekend. He's expected to hold meetings at State House and also so many other things. So among the agendas that he came to was the AUC chairmanship job. The AUC is the African Union chairmanship. So earlier on, Kenya had staged a contestant for the AUC chairmanship job. The Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga was supposed to vie for the AU chairmanship job, the African Union chairmanship job. Uganda was backing him, Rwanda was backing him, Kenya was backing him, many countries were backing him. However, it looks like the most important people are not backing him, and the most important people are the among them are the US government. That is why we saw the US ambassador, her name is Meg Whiteman, give Raila a visit on his home last week. And after the visit, it looked like the visit was to tell Raila, getting the job. And since then, he has been speaking about how Addis Ababa is not a matter of life and death. Addis Ababa, in this case, is used to refer to the AU because the AU, the African Union, has its capital in Addis Ababa. So it looks like it is almost certainly now that Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga will not win, will not be the next African Union chairman. That, as I said, was after a visit by the US ambassador to Kenya, Meg Whiteman, to his home. Looks like somebody sabotaged the candidature. Might be the US, might be the people who run the AU. I don't know, but he's not going to be the chairman. So among the agendas that Museveni is visiting Kenya for was that because he is a close ally. He's a close friend of Odinga, been friends for a while. So, and he was among the first presidents to endorse Odinga. It's the president who votes for the AUC chairman. They're the one who cast votes for the AUC chairman. So Odinga was all over Africa looking for votes. He was in Rwanda, he was in Tanzania, he was in Uganda, and among the first people to endorse him was Museveni. And Museveni had a very long, beautiful speech today talking about Africa's resources and a lot of other things that I'm not going to share because of time. But he's still here for the next 3 days, so we're going to see what he's going to say. But that was all that was happening in Africa today with child soldiers being used in Mozambique, in many other African countries, including the Central African Republic. That is what Maria and Setu are talking about on the Ugandan side. On a day where Benin and Niger have agreed on a temporary deal to authorize exportation of oil from the Benin port. This is after Niger signed a $400 million deal with a Chinese company to export 90,000 extra barrels of oil per day. And so Benin had refused Niger permission to load the oil from the airport, and Benin being a landlocked country with no outlet, Niger being a landlocked country with no outlet had to look for a solution, and that is why they went into talks with the Chinese intervening, and Benin has now granted Niger permission to load the first ship. In Tunisia, the government of Kais Saied is detaining journalists and anybody else who's criticizing him for extending his term in power. Criticizing a president has been termed as undermining state security. In Kenya, Kenya and Uganda have also signed a similar deal like the one in Benin and Niger, with Kenya allowing Uganda to export and import refined oil through their port, Uganda being another landlocked country. And Museveni is on a 3 days visit to Kenya. And that was all that was happening throughout Africa today. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And a big shout out to Smart J, who's just joined as I was leaving, and a big shout out to Jiba Jaba, who's also just joined. I hope you have a good day. I'm gonna be here tomorrow on Friday updates. If you are from Kenya, it's raining really, really heavily, Smart J. So stay safe.